Have you ever felt alone, even surrounded by people? Loneliness and isolation, although they are simple words, carry an immense weight in the lives of many. Nowadays, with the rush of routine, the constant noise of social networks, and the apparent digital connection, many of us get lost in a silent void. It's not about being alone physically, but rather about the feeling that even with everything around, no one really sees, no one really understands. Loneliness is like an echo that reverberates within us. Sometimes she whispers, other times, he screams. It can come when we least expect it, as in the longest nights, when the silence seems deafening. Or maybe during the day, in the middle of a crowd, when emotional disconnection weighs on the chest. Isolation, in turn, is not only physical. It's not just about living apart from others, but about feeling emotionally detached, even next to someone. It is to be present, but invisible. As if the world were a movie scene and you were just a spectator, without really being part of the plot. Often, we avoid talking about it, perhaps for fear of seeming fragile, perhaps because we believe that it is a passing phase. But what if it isn't? What if loneliness is more common than we think? What if, like you, thousands of people around the world feel this same pain, but hide behind smiles and superficial interactions? In today's video, we will explore more about this feeling of loneliness and isolation, and understand how it works, the effects it has on our lives, as well as share tips on how to control it. So, stay until the end, because the reflections we will make can transform your way of seeing and understanding these feelings. Let's start this conversation with a simple question, but one that carries a huge weight. Have you ever felt alone, even surrounded by people? Loneliness and isolation are profound, universal, and sometimes unavoidable human experiences. But why have these sensations become so present in our society, in the midst of so much technology and so many connections? Before we move on, we need to understand the difference between loneliness and isolation. Loneliness is the feeling of being emotionally disconnected, even if there are people around you. It is an emptiness that is born within us, a lack of genuine connection. Isolation, on the other hand, is physical or social distancing. It is, in fact, separated from human interactions. What you may not know is that these two conditions, while different, are deeply intertwined. A person may be physically isolated and feel deeply lonely, but they may also be surrounded by friends and family and still feel the crushing weight of loneliness. Loneliness isn't about how many people are around you, it's about the depth of your connections. Why talk about it now? In today's world, with so many social networks, apps, and ways to connect, loneliness can seem like a paradox. However, it is exactly this digital hyperconnection that makes us feel more emotionally disconnected. We are surrounded by information, images, and instant messages, but these superficial interactions often only add to the emptiness within. Loneliness and isolation are central issues in our time. They affect our mental health, our relationships, and even our physical well-being. We need to talk about it, understand its causes, and find ways to deal with these sensations, so that we can cultivate a fuller and more meaningful life. Did you know that loneliness is one of the biggest public health problems today? Studies show that it can be as harmful to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Chronic loneliness is associated with a significant increase in the risk of depression, anxiety, and even cardiovascular disease. We are not just talking about a passing feeling. Constant loneliness can erode our mental and physical health over time, making it a risk factor for serious illness. Now, a quick pause for a special invitation. If you identify with these topics and want to continue this journey of self-knowledge and reflection, subscribe to the channel. Here, you'll find in-depth content, which can not only change the way you see the world, but also transform your relationship with yourself and others. Now that we understand the seriousness of the problem, let's explore what leads us to this feeling of loneliness. At some point, have you ever wondered how we got here? Our interactions have changed dramatically. Technology connects us to anyone in the world in a matter of seconds, but many of those connections are shallow and ephemeral. We live in the era of the illusion of proximity. While exchanging likes and comments, we often neglect deep and meaningful conversations. Cultural changes also play an important role. In increasingly individualistic societies, we prioritize our personal goals, often at the expense of our connections with others. And with that, the emotional emptiness becomes even deeper. Another important factor is life events. Bereavement, divorce, or even a simple move to another city can make us feel disconnected from the world around us. When we go through these transitions, our support network can seem distant. In these moments, loneliness doesn't just arise from the absence of company, but from the feeling that no one can truly understand the pain or challenge we're facing. Loneliness also has strong roots in mental health issues. Disorders such as depression and anxiety can lead us to isolate ourselves even more. It's as if these conditions create a vicious cycle. The more anxious or depressed we feel, the more we distance ourselves from people, and the more we distance ourselves, the more these conditions worsen. Loneliness and isolation not only affect our mind, but also our body. Studies reveal that people who suffer from chronic loneliness have a weakened immune system, are more likely to develop heart disease, high blood pressure, and even dementia. In other words, loneliness not only hurts us emotionally, it literally sickens our body. In addition, loneliness profoundly affects how we see ourselves. When we are alone, we may begin to doubt our worth, questioning whether we are worthy of love and companionship. It erodes our self-esteem and, little by little, we start to see ourselves through a distorted lens, where our self-image is increasingly fragile. Finally, loneliness creates barriers in our interpersonal relationships. When we feel isolated, our ability to forge deep bonds with others is impaired. It is as if we created an invisible wall around us, preventing anyone from truly approaching. Have you ever had the feeling of being in a conversation, but not being able to really open up? Like you're wearing a mask, not allowing others to see who you really are? This is the trap of loneliness. It disconnects us from ourselves and others, creating a cycle that feeds back. It is important to remember that not all loneliness is the same. Let's explore some of the different types of loneliness, as understanding its nuances can help us find ways to overcome it. Emotional loneliness arises when we miss a deep connection with another person, someone with whom we can share our innermost feelings. You may even have people around you, but without that emotional connection, the emptiness continues. On the other hand, social loneliness occurs when we don't have a support network or a group of friends to interact with, even if in a more casual way. Imagine being at a crowded party, surrounded by people, but feeling that no one there is really with you. This is emotional loneliness. Now imagine being completely alone, with no one to share even the simplest moments with. This is social loneliness. Sometimes, we choose isolation. Whether for fear of being hurt, or for a need to protect ourselves from uncomfortable situations, we end up moving away from people. Self-imposed loneliness may seem like a conscious choice, but it often hides a deep fear of vulnerability. And how many times do we not move away because we think the world would not understand us? Perhaps because I believe that it is easier to isolate ourselves than to risk being judged. But this decision comes at a price. The withdrawal can turn into a cycle of loneliness, from which it becomes increasingly difficult to get out. And perhaps the most painful form of loneliness is being surrounded by people and yet feeling invisible. Have you ever been there? You can be in a lively environment, with friends, family, or colleagues, and still feel like you don't belong anywhere. This kind of loneliness reminds us that, in the end, the quality of our connections is far more important than the quantity. Now that we understand the different forms of loneliness and their causes, it's important to know that there are ways to cope with these feelings. We don't need to be stuck in this cycle forever. First, meditation and mindfulness. An effective way to deal with loneliness is to practice meditation and mindfulness. By connecting with the present moment and our own feelings, we can learn to embrace loneliness without it consuming us. These moments of reflection help us to get to know ourselves better and to discover that, many times, the fear of loneliness prevents us from seeing that it can be an opportunity for personal growth. When we practice mindfulness, we are giving ourselves the chance to slow down, to observe our thoughts and emotions without judgment, and to accept that loneliness, at times, is part of life. Second, by seeking meaningful connections. Cultivating deep and meaningful relationships is one of the most powerful ways to combat loneliness. We are not talking about dozens of friends, but a few people with whom we can share our essence, our truth. How many times do we get caught up in superficial interactions for fear of showing who we really are? The truth is, in order to create meaningful connections, we need to be willing to open up, to be vulnerable. This means risking being seen in our authenticity, without masks. Third, activities to combat loneliness. If you're feeling lonely, try to engage in activities that bring purpose. Volunteering, for example, is an excellent way to connect with others while also helping those in need. Helping others makes us realize that we are part of something bigger, that our actions can impact the lives of others in positive ways. Participating in interest groups, such as book clubs, art activities, or even online groups with topics that interest you, can provide opportunities to create new connections and feel part of a community. In addition, discovering new hobbies and interests can help us fill that void that loneliness often leaves. The search for activities that provide us with pleasure and fulfillment can be the gateway to new friendships and meaningful interactions. Finally, loneliness and isolation are challenging experiences, but they are not insurmountable. Instead of seeing them as enemies, we can see them as teachers. They show us the value of deep connections, remind us that in the end, we are all looking for belonging and to be seen. And how about turning loneliness into an opportunity? A chance to learn to value small connections, to open up to new experiences, and to seek what really nourishes our soul. Remember, you are not alone in this journey. Many people, in different parts of the world, share these same feelings, these same pains. The difference is in how you decide to deal with them. If you like this content, embark with me on a journey of self-knowledge, Stoic philosophy, and personal development. Here, let's learn together how to live a life with more purpose, more connection, and, above all, more meaning.